I had had enough of that boys' home. I ended up running away, stealing a car, and going back to Michigan. I'm like, I'm going home. I want to see my friends, you know. And I did. I made it back there. I got
See,
arrested the following
that's
day.
that's where you messed up. You left her behind. You should have stayed with
I
her.
mean, they're together now, so I don't know how messy it was.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny you say that because we have said that oftentimes. We've replayed our lives like, oh, if we would have just done this. But it's like, who knows? You know, that why, you know, if you
Yep.
go this way, you might have closed off this other path.
Today changes my whole entire life.
Huh? Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, and with me in the studio today is the beautiful and ever radiant Ro Clausen.
Hey,
Hey.
how you feeling?
I'm sounding a little hoarse, but
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good. I am excited for today's show.
I'm so excited. I was just about to say I might have to help you out because I got my voice back already.
Well, listen, you can take this and run with it, but I am excited to be here today with a friend of mine, someone who, I got to be honest, over, the last decade, I have often thought about, wondered where he was, how he was doing, and, we were entangled in our own battle, to make it out of prison. But throughout that period, we met a lot of incredible people along the way, and we don't always get the chance to reconnect and find out, what happened to them. And a lot of times, it's not a happy ending.
Yeah.
You don't, when we do hear about people, sometimes there's tragic endings, and other times it's just, there's no news. This is not one of those stories. This is one of the inspiring stories. This is what we love to highlight. So I am really excited to welcome my good friend Kyle and his wife, Felicia. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the invite. I was telling her, it's rare, like you said, to actually be able to reconnect with people that you made a connection with on the wrong side of the fence. And when I seen that you were out, I had told my wife I was uncertain, just kind of what your thoughts were about reconnecting. And I felt very blessed that you responded and that I'm able to have that old friendship rekindled.
Damn, we're going to dive into that because I'm curious to know why you would think I wouldn't want to hear from you, man. I was so excited when I saw your message, yeah, really, I couldn't wait to get back to you. And, since we've had a brief opportunity to talk, you've only been out a minute. And I don't want to jump too far ahead here, because you have an amazing story. And Ro and I just watched, our friend Chad Marks has his podcast. Chad focuses on kind of other areas, a lot of, the inside of prisons, and it's great work that he's doing to bring light to that. And I got to be honest, it was emotional for me watching your interview with him, hearing the two of you, recount a lot of that history. And I didn't realize it was, one of the few times since I have been out where I've had like an emotional response. Honestly, there have been very, very few, but it took me back, and it was an emotional roller coaster. There were highs and lows, but ultimately it left me feeling inspired that the three of us, you, Chad, and myself, that we're here, we're on the other side, and we have stories of success to share. And that's what people need to hear more of, right? Too often they hear the negative and they hear the dramatization and all the bad outcomes. We need to highlight more of the positive things. So all of us, in order to get to where we are today, had to go through some stuff to get here. And you covered a lot of that on Chad's show, But I want to make sure that everyone, all of our audience, everyone who's tuning in, getting an opportunity to meet you, that they know a little bit of your backstory. So whatever you want to share, kind of about your backstory, kind of maybe how you ended up in prison, and ultimately, you know, you have your wife is sitting there next to you, and that's something, you know, it's personal to us. Like, man, we love happy endings like that. So clearly that's a big part of what we want to focus on today. But I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give us some of your backstory, whatever you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, so I've tried to think about a way to condense the storyline because I did a lot of moving around. But I'm originally from a small town in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and and I had said this on the other podcast, so but you know, it's kind of a must that I reiterate. I had a good childhood for the most part, a normal childhood. Grew up in a small town. My whole family on my mother's side lived there, and so I had initially been instilled with good family values and morals. And I was baptized when I was a kid. I had to go to church every Sunday. I played mandatory, had to play all sports, hunting, fishing, a basic, small town upbringing. And unfortunately, like many families, my mother had suffered and still does in some ways from alcoholism. And being a single mom, to two kids. My sister is approximately 20 months older than me. And she struggled. She was never, parents always say this when you're young. They don't give you a handbook that says, here, this is how to parent your child. And as I grew older, I come to terms with that realization of how strong of a statement that is that sometimes people have kids and they're not prepared to be a parent. They don't know how to be a parent. No one taught them how, and they're having kids when they're still kids. And that was kind of my situation. My mom had us when we were still kids. She had to try to do the best to raise us on her own, and she went through many trials and tribulations in the attempt to do that. But that's the picture of my childhood in the large view. I'm not going to go too much into detail because it would take us 10 years to do that. But uh, anyways, as I had reached, about 11, 12 years old, now I'm starting to become a man, so to speak. And my mom didn't know how to deal with that. And she was dealing with her own struggles, and she was dealing with emotional turmoil and heartache, and to try to discipline and be there for a young boy. It wasn't working out for either of us, unfortunately. And I had a problem with authority, and she had a problem giving and being authoritative. And so one thing had led to another, which ended up with me being relocated out of my mother's house. I was put into foster care. I was put with my father, who then put me into foster care because he hadn't been in my life and had really no desire to. He had already had a new wife, a new son, and long story short, I ended up in the foster care system. And going from small town Escanaba, Michigan, population 12,000 or so, and growing up, when you're a kid and you grow up going to elementary school and you make friends, those friends become your life. They become an extended family. And every friend that I had instantly was gone. And I was relocated to a state that I had never lived, and in the inner city of St. Paul.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it was a big jump. The best way I could probably explain it would be like to go from a countryside upbringing to Philadelphia, where you're from, and I did not, having had the emotional confusion that I had with, why am I living with strangers? Like, what happened? Like, that was the question that I was always asking myself. Is like, what happened? Like, one day I'm with mom and sis, and the whole town is pretty much my family, whether they were friends or actually blood relatives, to now I'm in a city that I don't know. I've never even really been to a larger city. And I had already experimented with drugs. And, it started with marijuana and then, drinking like a couple sips of a beer. And
And
then
what age is this?
this was at 12 years old when
Wow.
when I had first experimented um, with marijuana. I was 12 years old, and looking back now, I see that I was trying to find an escape from my reality. From my emotions, from my anger, from my loneliness, and what have you. But so I came out here in 1997 to Minnesota, and shortly after went into foster care, and I just couldn't cope. Like living with a stranger, there was something about living with strangers that was so uncomfortable. It was like I didn't know if I
Yeah.
could sit down here. I didn't know if I could go in the fridge and get something to eat. I didn't know if I could go outside and play. I had no friends. I was going to a school where I knew nobody. And when you're at 12, 13 years old, if you grew up in the same town, I had all that already. I had hockey teammates, baseball teammates, basketball teammates, kids that I grew up with since diapers, and now they were 8 hours away from me. And the same thing that I had in my hometown when I moved, other people had already had. So they weren't looking for, I was the outsider. And that was so foreign to me. And that led to me rebelling. And my pre existent issues with authority were even more just raging inside of me. Like I didn't want to hear anything from anybody. And I remember telling numerous times saying, "You're not my parent. You can't tell me what to do." And but the uncomfortability that I had went through is what led to my eventual downfall and going to prison. Was that I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, and I didn't feel loved. And I don't say these things to make myself out to be a victim, because I don't, and I never have, and I believe that I'm a victor in many ways. And so I don't say these things to try to victimize myself, but just to give a true account of what my life was and where my head was at. Was that I didn't want to face the world, or like they say in recovery, life on life's terms, because life's terms for me were terrible, and I didn't want to face it. And anything that I could do to drown my feelings and my emotions and life's terms, anything I could do to drown them out was what I was looking to do, whether it was rebelling at school, which I started skipping school. Now I refuse to listen to anybody. I felt like the only person who ever could tell me what to do was my mom, and she was out of the picture. And so I started running away. I ran away from one foster home, and I ended up in hospitals, and I ended up in juvenile facilities, all behind.
When you say hospitals, what do you mean hospitals? What kind of
Yeah.
hospitals?
So when I was the short amount of time that I had spent with at my father's house, there was things that I'm not going to necessarily go into, and I hope that you don't take offense to that, Adam. But
Nope.
just really personal things and abuse that was going on, immediately, that led me to lashing out. And I will share this. My stepmother at the time, who I'm not fond of, she's not fond of me. Um, she extremely hated my mother. She had never met my mother, but she was very vocal about her opinion of my mom. And if my mom would have done this, I wouldn't be this way. And I don't want him in the house. He's violent, and I don't trust him, and I'm uncomfortable. And you know me, and I've been the same. I like to believe most of my life. We have those core things about us that are always there. And I don't think that I have ever been, you know, a piece of shit. But anyway, she was convinced that I did not belong in that house, and it led to a fight one night between her and I. She had caught me smoking a cigarette, and she told me to put the cigarette out, and I refused. I told her I'm not putting it out. And which led to her calling my father. He came home from work. Physical altercation ensued. I'm 13 years old. My dad picked me up, slammed me on my head, and it was over with. But I made threats as he was on top of me. I had made threats to my stepmother, in anger, a kid lashing out. And because I hadn't commit any crimes, I was running away, skipping school, which had I had skipped school enough, I would have become truant, but it never got to that point. But they tried to place me. My dad didn't want me in the house, and they tried to place me outside of the house. And the police department was telling my father and my stepmother that, hey, he hasn't committed a crime. There's nothing that we can do. Like, you have custody. There's nothing that we can do. And so I feel like it was a little bit coached, because my dad was like, well, he can't stay here. He's not staying here. My wife is not comfortable with him here. And the officer, I'll never forget, he said, well, if he has made any threats of any kind to himself or to others, that we can utilize the option of a psychiatric unit. And they jumped on it instantly, and it was explained to them that it would be under a voluntary placement agreement, that my father would be billed and have to pay for placing me there. And without hesitation, they jumped on it. And an hour later, I found myself in a hospital, man, around broken kids. And this really made a big impression on me. Not that I would come to realize it until later in my life, but it gave me a glimpse into the world of hardship that I had yet to have experience with. And it made me see myself differently than what I had started seeing myself as, which was like a victim. I started seeing myself as a victim, and I got around kids who truly were victimized, and that made an impression on me, and one that stays with me today. But so, to try to stay off of that beaten path, I had, after being released from there 7 days later, I went to my uncle's house, which is my dad's identical twin, who I love. I'm still in contact with to this day. He's a great person and great support for me. But I had went to stay with him, and again, it didn't heal the wounds that I had. I was already too far gone. I was already too convinced that my life was horrible, and no one could tell me any different, and no opportunities were able to pull me out of my own self-pity, and I try to be nice to myself now that I'm older. And I say that to say this, that I wasn't nice to myself as a kid. I always pointed the finger at myself. There must be something wrong with me. Nobody loves me. My own mother gave me away. My dad don't want me. My sister refused to talk to me after I had been placed out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Other family members disappeared. And I just really took on this victim persona, and it made me angry, man. And the only way that I could cope with, misunderstood emotions was through drug use. Like, that's where I found my release, because whether it was stoned or high on some other substance, I didn't care. I didn't care if I was loved. I didn't care if I was needed. I didn't care that I'm a runaway on the streets in the Twin Cities, hungry, and I wasn't lonely, because the drugs became my comfort. That's where I found my comfort. That's where I found acceptance, because the people that I was surrounding myself around to get the drugs were also the same type of people that I was becoming an addiction. And
Hey,
the
hey, Kyle,
familiarity.
one thing before you go on, man. I feel like I need to point this out. You were a child when you left that house, and just a child, right?
Yeah.
And anything that happened, as a child, we're supposed to be taken care of by our parents. That's their responsibility. I hear everything you're saying, and believe me, I've thought much about my past in similar circumstances. Being a parent now, having a son, I view the world very differently. I can say as a parent, man, like that is my responsibility no matter what. That is my son. So, we don't get to choose our family. And sometimes the circumstances, the things that happen to us, they're completely outside of our control. And as a child, man, you should have had people looking out for you. And none of that is on you. So the path that you went down, I like, I get it, man. I get it. I can totally relate. And I just wanted to make sure you knew that, because what I'm hearing is you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And sometimes
Yeah.
it just helps, to have somebody else on the outside tell you, man, none of that was on you.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that. And I'm not gonna lie and say that I have become fully convinced of that, because part of growing up and becoming what my idea of a real man is I do take responsibility for the things that I contributed to the downward spiral, right? Because even in my young age, I had a decent enough head on my shoulders where there was that Pythagorean why they call it, where every day there's this fork in the road where you can go this way or that way, and I made conscious decisions to go the wrong way. And I accept that now as a grown man. But when I was younger, and even up until I was with you when I was 23 years old, and I still hadn't accepted responsibility for my own part in my own downfall. I was still uh being victim, like, oh well, if they would have did this, then I would have had a better life. And if somebody would have done this or that, then I would have been different. I would have been successful. I could have, I was blaming everybody and not ever looking deep inside myself at the conscientious decisions that I had made, even in my youth, where I had people go, hey, we're going to help you. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And I was too far gone, man. I was so lost in addiction that I would get the help for a couple days, and then reality would start to sink in, sobriety would start to sink in. And I always tell my wife I was emotionally underdeveloped, and I would instantly go find that familiarity, no matter how destructive it was, and so fast forwarding, I made a couple juvenile stays where I had stole a car. That was the first crime that I had committed, and I ran away from a boys' home that I was in. Well, let me back up just a couple steps, because this is where I met the most amazing person in my life. Who, here we are 20 years later. So I was in a boys' home in a small town, northern Minnesota, and uh, I went to a alternative school, but we took the bus with the public school kids. And Felicia lived right down the road from the boys' home, and she took the bus to school with us every morning. And I remember, she said she doesn't remember, but I remember she had got on the bus one morning, and I was, tough guy, too cool for school, literally, and she had got on the bus, and I had my backpack sitting next to me, and she'd stopped and she asked me, can I sit here? And I remember like thinking, man, there's no way this gorgeous girl is like trying to sit with me, And so I didn't even say anything. I just moved my bag and she sat down. And then right when she was getting off at the high school, I had to transfer buses and go to alternative school. But right when she was getting off the bus, she gave me a note. And I just thought, man, this is crazy. This beautiful ass girl like wants to talk to me. So I'm reading the note, and it was basically, I don't remember verbatim, but it was, hey, you're cute. I want to talk to you. Will you write me back? And so here I am at school writing her back. And as they say, the rest was history. That started a relationship that, even though it was minimal in our childhood, and this is what really trips us both out, is we didn't have a whole lot of time to be together when we were young, but it wasn't necessary because we had both something, that magnetic pull was already there. And So
we'd formed a connection.
Yeah, we really did. And it was in brokenness, because she was going through things that were similar to what I was going through and dealing with, things within the house, without the household that I had already been dealing with. And unbeknownst to each other, we didn't know that we were dealing with those things.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man, it's brought a lot of spirituality into my life because there was that connection. And so I had had enough of that boys' home. I ended up running away, stealing a car, and going back to Michigan. I'm like, I'm going home. I want to see my friends. And I did. I made it back there. I got arrested
See,
the following day.
that's where you messed up. You left her behind. You should have stayed with her.
I mean, they're together now, so I don't know how messy it was.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because we have said that oftentimes. We've replayed our lives like, oh, if we would have just done this. But it's like, who knows, that why, if you go this way, you might have closed off this other path. So it's like,
Yep.
All in all, it worked out. But that started once I had committed that crime. Now I became a part of the system where, there was no longer a parental guardian. I was a ward of the state, and the state decided if I'm grounded, if I'm, truant, if I'm good, if I'm bad. And I ended up in a boot camp, and I ended up back to the boys' home, and which really was my home. I love their name was Alan Sherrill, and they were amazing people. They were one of the only 5 places in my youth, the foster homes that I had been, that they loved the kids. I mean, they made you feel at home, and they told you this is your home. You want something to drink? It's in the fridge. You want something to eat? It's in the deep freezer. You want to go outside? You know where the yard is. You still couldn't leave the yard, but they treated us like family. And I don't know why I ever ran away from that place, but probably to hang out with her so I could go see her. But
yeah, he crawled in my window one time.
Yeah.
Oh, just once?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't around very long.
But yeah, so that kind of got me into the state system. And then again, I ran away again, and I went and stayed somewhere. So I went and stayed on an Indian reservation. I had a couple friends that I went to school with. They were like, man, the cops can't come out here. You're safe out here. And I went and stayed there. And it just fueled my drug addiction. It fueled violence, criminal activity. And I ended up getting beat up. I got jumped on, and I was hurt pretty bad. My collarbone was broke. My nose was broke. My lip was busted. My eyes were beat shut. And at this time I was 16, about to turn 17. And I don't know what, compelled me to call my father, but I did. I called his work. I knew where he had worked at, and I called his work. And I think being as broken physically and emotionally as I was, it was just like I was reaching out for anything. And I really felt like the Grim Reaper was stalking me, like I'm not going to last long. And I mean, I'm walking around like this because I can't hold my arm up. I can't move my head because everything's connected to your collarbone. And I was just a mess, man. And my dad actually was responsive, and it led to a conversation, and he told me to come to his house when his wife wasn't there, and that he would call the courts, he would call my social worker, and he would figure out a way to get them to release me so that he could take me back to my hometown in Michigan. And I remember showing up at his house, and as soon as he seen me, he just started bawling. And it was one of the times in my life that I made a connection with my dad where I felt like, and it was sad because it was like I had to be on death's door to get the response that I have been looking for virtually my whole life. And but he made it happen. Within 3 hours, he had contacted the courts, my social worker, told them what kind of condition I was in, and that he was worried that, if I stayed where I was staying, that it could cost me my life. And they figured it out to where my dad had to come sign some papers, pay some of the fees the fines that I had owed, and they released me to him, and he drove me to Michigan that day. And this is what I was referring to earlier about taking responsibility for my own actions. And I had an opportunity right there. I had a job lined up. I was moving into an apartment with a childhood friend. Um, I was about to turn 17. The state of Michigan, you're considered an adult at 17. And I get there and it was like, woohoo, I'm free and I'm drinking and I'm doing the same things that I was doing uh, all my teenage years. And 4 days after he brought me back there, the guy that I was living with, we were drinking, walking around town. Obviously minors can't drink, and we must have had it written all over our faces. And a public safety officer seen us like 1 a.m, turned around, flicked the lights. We take off running, and I jumped right into a vehicle to hide. Really, it was my intention. And as I'm crouched down in this car, my head's hitting these keys. And, you know, say it was because I was drinking. I tend to attribute it to that, but I ended up starting the car and getting out of that area and going and finding my friend walking through the town and picked him up. And here comes another fork in the road. He tells me, "What are you doing? Get out of the car. Let's go home." And I'm over there, "No, get in the car. Let's go for a ride." "No, Kyle, get out of the car. Let's go home. We got away. Let's go sleep it off." And "No, come on, let's go. Now that I got the car, let's go for a ride." He refused, and I went for a ride, and I got pulled over, and I went to jail, and
How
and
old
and
were you
that's
at
what
this point, Kyle?
I was just about to turn 17 in like 2 weeks. So they brought me to the county jail as an adult, and I ended up getting a joyriding charge. And again, another opportunity was blessed upon me. The judge said, "Man, you're young." He knew some of my family members in that town. He knew some of my story from my juvenile, when my mother had put me out the house, my juvenile years. And he said, "I'm going to give you the HIDA status. Do your time in county jail." They gave me 90 days for, they dropped the UDAA, unlawfully driving away of a vehicle, dropped it to joyriding, said, "You're a kid, you made a mistake, you shouldn't be drinking, do your 90 days, get out, do your probation, and we'll expunge it from your record," you know? And I got out, I did my little time. I had got out, and I wasn't ready, man. Uh, and that's the truth of it. I wasn't ready. I had issues, I still have issues, but I really had issues that needed to be addressed and needed to be sorted through, not medicated, not catered to. I needed a harsher reality than what I had lived to come out of that. And when I had got out, they asked me my release address. I didn't have one. None of my family would take me. I was the black sheep of the family for real. And they said, "Well, if you don't have an address, we can't release you to being homeless." So I ended up getting a hotel room through the Salvation Army, which I've always appreciated what they do for people, because they do a lot of good for people. And I went to this hotel room, and I wasn't ready, man. They told me I had to report later that day. I didn't report. I still had that issue with authority, and uh, you know, I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I don't want to get too long winded in all of it. But I know that, Adam, you and I had shared some of my childhood. Um, as you know, in there, it's not often that you get the opportunity to be vulnerable with each other, to where, a lot of these things could be expressed. Some of that isn't because of time, some of it is because of ego. People don't want to expose themselves in there. And, but that kicked off a chain of events. I had went in and out of county jail 2 more times for violating that probation. And when they let me out the final time, I was so lost in addiction. And I don't know how much is suitable to even share on a podcast, or on an interview that is public. But anyone who's been there knows what I'm referring to. A life of degeneracy, of lying and stealing and manipulation, and just brokenness, man, to a degree where anything that you could do. I used to tell people I was the guy who would take some pills and then ask what they were. So I
Yeah.
knew what's about to happen. I would take them first, and then I'd say, "What was that, anyways? What am I going to feel like here? Like, what can I expect?" And then, they would tell me, "Oh, this, and this," and I'd say, "Well, did I take enough? Should I take some more? Because I don't want to just take a little and not escape." Like essentially that's what I'm trying to do. I want to escape. I don't want to take something that's not going to get me to my goal, right? So people were like, this dude's off his rocker, you know? And
Yeah.
I thought I was normal, you know. I thought that no, this is what I do, this is who I am, and it wasn't. And I come to learn later in life, like, I missed my childhood and it was never coming back, and I knew it. I was never going to play hockey again. I was never going to be on the basketball team, the baseball team. I was never going to go to prom. I was never going to do these things. It was over with, you know. And now I'm a felon, and I have nobody in my corner, and I was just like feeding into that negativity over and over again. So my drug addiction was in full force, and I was doing everything and anything, and which led to my charges, to going to prison, which was breaking and entering, larceny of firearms. I had broken into my mom's boyfriend's camp, who is the guy who told her to put me out of the house, by the way, when I was younger.
Mm.
And we had gotten to a confrontation. He had put his hands on my mom. I had intervened, and he pulled a gun on me. And so I went back to his house later, and I broke in and I stole every gun he had, and I got rid of them, and I ended up, that kind of put me into the place which led me to federal prison, because those were state charges where I was like, man, I messed up. Now I'm really in for it. I might as well get as much in as I can before they catch up to me, because I'm screwed. Like, look what I just did. I broke into a house and stole guns, And
So you knew when you did that, you knew it was serious, that there was going to be
yeah,
more
because
consequences.
absolutely, because the altercation had just occurred between myself and
Yeah.
um, him. So then here the next day, well, literally 6 hours later, his house is burglarized, and the very gun that he had pulled on me is gone with all the other ones. And so I knew that it was going to be bad for me. And I didn't know the law, so I didn't know what it was going to be. But in my mind, I'm getting a life sentence. That's what I was thinking,
Mm.
And it pushed me over the edge, which led to further drug abuse. And I had become so addicted that I was physically addicted. I could not go without painkillers. And if I tried, I would get physically sick, to the point where I would do anything to not feel that type of sickness, And I tried to rob a pharmacy, man. When I was 17 years old, I went into a store with a gun and had no idea what I was doing. Didn't even want to be there, but I just didn't want to be sick. And I knew that within that building there was stuff that could make me not sick. And I went in there and was instantly scared that I was even in the store. To be honest with you, I'm older now. I'm not stuck in the prison mentality of trying to look cool. I was scared shitless. And then to top it off and make matters worse, the gun was discharged, which was accidental. And it was even accepted as accidental. That, I'm sure anyone who's been through that process knows they test the gun for a hair trigger, and they try to match your story to what they can prove happened, and it was proven that it was accepted that was what had happened. And I won't get into that because I don't want to seem like I'm glorifying it, but I was charged with the 924C, subsection C, which, as you know, is use discharge of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. And I was already in state prison when I got indicted by the federal government for that charge. I was in state prison for the B&E and larceny of firearms, which I had got 2 to 5 and 2 to 10 concurrent. And right when I was thinking I was getting out, here comes an indictment for the 924C, which was a mandatory minimum of 10 years. And that's what I got. And that's what had sent me to federal prison. Um, and as you know, a journey that I was not prepared for, you
Well,
know.
and you know, that was the place where you and I met, and you said you were, how old were you when you and I met? You said 23?
So when I got to Allenwood, I was 22. So I was 22 when I met
Wow.
you. And I turned 23 right after that. Yeah.
Okay, so when I came in 2000, I think I was 23, turned 24, so very much that same age, you know, and but here I am when you come in. I've been in a few years at this point, right?
Yeah.
So I have the benefit of just having been in a little bit longer. I see you come in and I'm like, man, I saw so many similarities. And for whatever reason, like whatever that connection was, I was like, man, I just want to see this dude do well. I want to see him, you know what I mean, get out of here, go on, have a life, because I was serving that life sentence, right? And that was something that I never wanted. It was something that I spent a lot of time while I was on the inside thinking about, man, what could I have done differently to make sure, you know, that this wasn't the result? And here I am seeing you come in. I'm like, this guy's got his whole life ahead of him. And I know a lot of times, you know, I watch so many other people come into that environment, right? And they hit that fork in the road, and I, you know, watch them make that decision. Is this going to be your life? Or are you going to choose, you know what I mean, to take a different path, hold on to hope that, man, I got this life in front of me outside of here. And it's so hard to see that. And for most people, you know, anybody that's watching this podcast who's never been in a prison, let alone a maximum security penitentiary, which, like, you're cut off from the world. And there are times where it seems like that is your only world. Whatever's happening outside of there doesn't matter, doesn't exist. But for me, meeting you was like a glimpse, you know, like I wanted to live vicariously through you. I was like, man, you got your whole life, dude. I want to see you get out. I want to see you succeed. So anyways, that's kind of what was on my mind at that time. I had a little bit the benefit of, you know, just foresight a few years ahead. And yeah. So tell me from your perspective, what it was like coming into that environment.
Man, I had mentioned this a little bit, and like you were saying there, that Chad's podcast focuses a little bit on the more, I like to say, nitty gritty details of penitentiary life, whereas I see this more as about triumph and overcoming, and a lot more positivity and the power of relationships and marriage and whatnot. So I won't go too far off into that the prison thing, but when I had first got there, like you said, I shut out any and all thoughts about freedom. You know, I really did, because it was too hard to have one foot in and one foot out, right? And we have there was another guy that was there with us. He went by the name Opa. I don't know if you remember him, but he used to tell me he was doing life sentence. He still is doing life sentence. And he used to tell me, he said, I know it sucks to say this. He said, but I don't envy you. And I was like, what do you mean? I got an outdate. And he was like, yeah, but it must be super hard to walk around here every day and have to worry in the environment that we're in now, you know, in a USP, and have to worry if you're going to make it out of here or not. And that was, you know, that is the best expression that I could provide people. It's like every day, until had kind of surrendered like a moron to prison life, every day was just, I was so anxiety ridden. You know, am I gonna get jumped on? Am I gonna get attacked over something that has nothing to do with me? Am I gonna be made to attack somebody else? somebody that I'm walking down the sidewalk with going to get into something. Now I have to help them. And then my whole life's forfeit. And as you remember, I got 2 more years at Allenwood, for standing with something that I didn't really have any reason to, other than prison politics, you know, kind of said like, hey, these guys are taking the team. So, which means making them come in your cell and extract you um, by force. And it was because they're doing it. I'm obligated. I can't not do it, because the results of not supporting what was going on could be my life, and people always like to think, and I'm sure you may or may not have experienced this, oh, that's Hollywood. It ain't really like that. And I try to tell people with as much sincerity and intensity as I can, it was like that. As you know, it was like that. Your life was on the line, and so I had forgot about, like you said, I forgot about society. I forgot about the goals or dreams that I had once had about, man, when I get out this, when I get out, all that disappeared. I had really shelved it. And mind you, the woman sitting next to me now, my wife, had written me a couple times like, when are you getting out of there? Like, I thought you only had 2 years. What's going on? Like, why are you still there? Why are you in Pennsylvania? Why are you in Louisiana? Like, she had, always touched base with me and let me know what was going on in her life. And I just had to shut it out. I couldn't catch feelings, as they say. I couldn't believe in hope. And like, it was too hard to do the time. And this is why I've always commended you, and I'm going to commend you now, because while I was at Allenwood, that's the longest I ever made it at one place, and a lot of that was because I had people like you around me to keep me busy, there was like, I always seen the hope that you had, and that hope, that energy that you had with the physical fitness, with the mental stability and the intellectual pursuits. It planted seeds in the garden of my mind that would later come to fruition, and but to answer your question, like, I did exactly what you said most of us have to do, and I surrendered to prison. I surrendered that this is it, and yeah.
I'll say this, because there's not too often on this podcast that we really go back to talking about that aspect of prison. But talking about, being cut off from the outside, for me, it was always challenging. I would go out at this point, rows in my life, and that dramatically changed things. For me, having a life sentence, as crazy as this sounds, there was a point where I was at peace. For the first time in my life, I found peace inside of a maximum security penitentiary, because I finally came to terms with who I was. I was good. I wasn't happy about where I was, but I guess at a point where I could finally breathe. I'm like, okay, I'm good. Now what? Now I can focus on moving forward. And it wasn't that long after, or at least it felt like, that Roke came into my life. And now it's like, oh, damn. Like, now I got to straddle. How am I going to do this? I go out to that visiting room, and I'd be out there, and the whole time, I'd try and disconnect from the inside, but I'd have to flip a switch when I'd come back through and get dressed. And my first thought was always, damn, what am I walking back into? And to walk into the unit when the yard's not moving, and I look up, on the tier, and to know instantly, is there a problem? Is there I am back in this world, and I just left all that behind. That was very, very challenging. And I credit her all the time with me being here today, not only being who I am today, but literally being here, because it changed my decision making in many of those instances where there were situations where I was ready to say, you know what, F it. Like, it is what it is. Here's where we're at. Where I had to step out of my comfort zone and politic and figure out another resolution, because I'm like, otherwise we'll never have a chance. Like, I won't have that future. So that's a fine line to walk, and we don't really talk too much about that. So the fact that, you know, you said it was a stupid choice to go all in. It's completely understandable when you don't have something to anchor you outside of that environment. That's the only way that you can live in order to get through it and get to the other side, which thankfully you did. And you had good reason to get to the other side.
Yeah. I want to add this too. When Adam was watching your interview on Chad's podcast, he kept saying like, oh my God, I've been trying to say that for years. And he just articulated that in a way that was perfect, and I've never been able to. And as you were telling that part about having to shut off the outside world, I have the nonprofit I started, Strong Prison Lives and Families, when Adam was on the inside. And at one point we had 100,000 members. And out of those members, 100% of them, when they were together before he went inside, every single one of them would come to me and say, he's shutting me out. He's only been inside for a couple weeks, couple months, this and that. And I would try to explain to them exactly what you just said. Number one, I never really had the right words for it like you just did. And number two, I'm not inside prison. I've never been inside of prison. So I was never able to explain it from that perspective. So thank you, because I will be passing the link to this podcast around anytime I get that question ever again. And before I turn it back to Adam, I would love for you guys to come back on for a part 2, because I know so much happened between you guys in your relationship and what Felicia was able to accomplish on the outside for you before you came home. I'm in awe of you, and I've never even met you before. So I'd love to do another episode, because I know we're going to be out of time soon, and I don't want to rush through this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Ro, because like I really want that was like my one is to see both of you also and talk to you guys, but is to just explain to people what Adam just said. Like, it's my anchor right here, you know. And when I had went back to prison, I had to make that choice again. Am I gonna surrender, you know? And I was going into a different system, and just it was a tension point in my life where like I finally I hit that why, and like I made the right move, man. And it was because of her. Like, when I got arrested, we were like loosely dating, you know, because I'm in Michigan, she's in Minnesota, and
we were both using,
and we were active addicts, and like we just weren't in the right place. But when I got arrested, she was like, I'm going to treatment, you know. Wow. I'm getting myself together, and I'm thinking, well, why would you do it now? Like, just because I'm in jail? And she was like, because we're getting married.
We had talked about it. We were actively using. Both of us were out on parole. He was on federal parole, and I was on parole in Minnesota because I had just gotten out of prison. November 2020. I got out of the workhouse, and so we had talked about, because we both knew that we were getting pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in Michigan at one point, and we were at the gas station, and I was like, listen, we should just go to treatment right now. But he didn't believe I would do it. And so like we had kind of talked about it before, and I've been in active addiction like since I was 14, and I've been in and out of prison and in and out of psych wards, in and out of treatments. I've been to 17 treatments, you know, and so like I knew that I didn't want to live in that life. You know, I just gotten out of prison. I was in there for 2 years, and like the day after I got out of work release, I relapsed. And so, and you know, I actually broke down to him, you know, when I did that, I just started bawling, because it's like I knew all of that entailed, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to stop, because I'd always been the type of addict that when I start, I don't stop till I hit a cell. And so like we had previously talked about doing treatment before, but he didn't really think that I was serious. So when I went to treatment, when he went to jail, which it actually took me, he went to jail in March and I went to treatment in May. So it actually took me a little bit to get there. But I did finally get there.
But I will say this, in regards to the part 2, I would love to do it because I would like you guys to hear I don't want to say result because this is going to be a lifelong journey for us. But I want people to hear, like you were saying, about how the relationship between being in prison and being married or being with somebody who's in society, and how that all worked and how we overcame it and how we coped with it. Like, I don't try to toot my own horn a whole lot, but I couldn't even tell you how proud of her I am and how proud of myself I am because we made it work. But it was when I was in county and I knew that she was still using, and I blocked her from being able to message me because I couldn't do the time and have the anxiety and the care and concern of what she was going through in that life. And her mom had reached out, who we're actually waiting. I got mother-in-law and stepson coming right now. They're on their way here from up north. And her mom was like, Fish needs to hear from you. You need to talk to her. And I said, the only way I'll talk to her is if she's in treatment. And which I did, I broke, but she did go to treatment.
Well, I think another part of it was you were scared that I was going to die.
Yeah, it was terrifying because every day I just waited for the guards to be like, Nelson, you got to come out. We need to talk to you,
Right.
And it was terrifying. And having lived that life, knowing what you were feeling and going through, but she went to treatment. And I mean, I can't even tell you, there were struggles. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. We still have struggles that we face every day, but the things that I watched her overcome, it was like a whetstone to my blade. It just sharpened me. It made me, it changed everything about my whole life. It really did. Like, she helped me heal from my childhood trauma. She helped me heal from the PTSD issues that I deal with from being in prison. I mean, to holding me when I'm having a nightmare and I'm dang near hitting her. And just like, I can't even tell you, it has been the greatest blessing. And, I remember when you met Ro and Allenwood, and I actually got to go out on a visit, and I seen you guys out there. And so when I had got out and I seen that, I looked you up on the locator and it said released. And I was just like, yes. So then, naturally the next thing you do, you go to Facebook, and I couldn't really find you. It wasn't popping up. But anyways,
Facebook put us in jail. That's why that profile in jail.
Yeah.
Okay. But when I seen that you were not only free, I didn't necessarily know yet that you had a son yet, but that you guys were together, that you guys made it. And I was just like, I was telling my wife, I was like, if any woman on the planet can understand what you went through, this woman will understand, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Because I got to give it to her. I mean, it's hard for us in there too, but we have a fence around us. We have limitations that we cannot exceed. They don't. They have to put their own fence around themselves.
Well put.
To keep people out, to stay, like, I can't even, I tell her all the time, like, I call her my Wonder Woman, like, because she did it, and it wasn't easy. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't easy. And that's what I would like to, like, focus more on, if we do a part 2, is just what they go through, Adam, to be there for us, and what they do for us, what it does to us as men, as individuals. Like, it changed me. I had a misfortune at the end of my term just recently, but I didn't catch a ticket. I took every class I could possibly take. I avoided any and all drama because of what she was doing out here. It gave me hope for a future that I'm now out here. Like, we are out here doing everything that we talked about on the phone doing. every little minute detail. And things like this, and this is what I was telling her. She was a little nervous about doing this and stuff. These are the kinds of networks that I didn't have the first time around that I have now, and I'm not going to keep making that left turn, and so I would like to hear what, how you guys made it to where you're at as well, because I think that we can gain a lot of knowledge secondhand, from you guys. And so on podcast, off podcast, I look forward to doing it, to pursuing
and in person, without a doubt. So
yeah.
Why don't we just agree to this right now? I don't know what your schedule looks like, but next week we're scheduled to be back here next week. Why don't we just continue with part 2 and let's roll right into it? And I'd really like the opportunity for us to talk more about our relationships and kind of pick it up from right here, since we got the background, and really focus on, the strength of our relationships and what we're focused on going forward. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great segue into that part 2, if you guys are down for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. We would love to do that. And I'm going to put it on the two of you. The two ladies are going to take more of the lead next time. So, because I'm sure all of our audience really wants to hear from both of you. You're amazing. The strength, perseverance, that's what this is really all about. And it really is the challenges that make us who we are. And the same thing for our relationships, right? The things that we go through together, like build bonds between men and between husband and wife, that, it's hard to replicate that. I say it all the time. That's our strength, right? Our strength is what we've been through. It's made us who we are. So, and that's what Gritability is really all about. So we'd love to have you back here next week, same time. And for all of you who tuned in, it's been another incredible episode of Gritability, the power of perseverance. We're going to be highlighting more of this story of success. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen.
And I'm Ro Clausen.
We'll see you back here next week.
It's so good to see you guys.
Thank you, guys. That was amazing.